Hi, and welcome back to Ask a Pennsylvania Dutchman. My name is Chris LaRose. This here is Doug Vandenford, our resident Pennsylvania Dutchman. How are you, Doug?
A-okay, buddy.
Anything you'd like to say to the world at large there?
Nay, not today.
All right. So, our question comes in today from Jonah Adamcik of Allentown, Pennsylvania. Allentown, Pennsylvania.
That's better.
And what Jonah wants to know, why do people discount the city Dutch?
Huh. Hey, that's a pretty good question. I think a lot of people out there that don't even know about the Pennsylvania Dutch, they think, oh, if the Pennsylvania Dutch only grew up on farms, lived out in the country. But there was quite a big portion of our population culture that lived in cities like Reading and Allentown and Lebanon and Lancaster, and even a little farther south into Montgomery County and Schuylkill Haven and Pottsville. It's true, there were quite a lot of Pennsylvania Dutch people that didn't grow up on farms, that lived in the city. You know, they moved maybe a couple generations before they grew up on the farm, and then to get a job or took a job, they had to move away from the farm because farming doesn't, you know, it's tough when you got 9 kids on the farm, and not all 9 kids can live there when they get old enough. They got to move away. There was a really large population of Pennsylvania Dutch that lived in the cities, especially Reading and Allentown. And, you know, over the years, in the early 1900s, they were the majority. When you went into parts of Reading or Allentown, that's all you heard was Pennsylvania Dutch. Newspapers were printed in German, and you had companies and businesses that did all their advertising in Pennsylvania Dutch, and all the clientele were Pennsylvania Dutch. But, you know,
the problem with city Dutch is they don't stay Dutch for long.
And it's not their fault. You know, it's purely economics is what really changes it. You know, as the Pennsylvania Dutch that lived out in the farm and out in the country, you got to remember, they were kind of isolated. They were among other Pennsylvania Dutch, and there weren't a lot of, let's call them outsiders, that came in to the culture. Because all the farms and surrounding farms, well, they all were Pennsylvania Dutch. But in the city, as we all know, you know, you have cities that have a lot of different kind of people in them. And take Reading, for example. In the early 1900s, I don't know what the percentage was, but I bet it was over 80% of the city was German, Pennsylvania Dutch. Some Irish and so forth and Italians, but as time marched on in the 1900s, then you had other people coming into the city. You had more Italians and more Irish and Scotch-Irish, and then you had the new immigrants after the World Wars. You had a large Latino population coming in. Well, those Pennsylvania Dutch that were in the city, you know, they're coming into contact with all these other ethnic groups, and yeah, things changed, and I think a lot of as the generations moved on, the ones that weren't out on the farm, they didn't pass the culture on, they didn't pass the language on because they didn't see the need for it anymore. Where the people out in the country, in the farms, they kept it going because they didn't have that interaction with the other cultures and so forth. So this is really, you know, it's a great question. And there are still Pennsylvania Dutch that live in the cities. However, that percentage has gone way down. Or the problem is that the Pennsylvania Dutch that live in the cities, maybe they see themselves as Pennsylvania Dutch, but they still don't carry on all the traditions, specifically the language. You know, the language has been lost for a couple generations for those people. For most, maybe there's some out there that do it, but I would imagine it's got to be a small percentage. You know, this is almost like, this is a PhD thesis question, you know, what happened to the city Pennsylvania Dutch? But my opinion would be that they came into contact with all these other ethnic groups, and, you know, it's typical, it happens everywhere, and you could say that for every ethnic group. You know, the Irish stopped being as Irish as they came into contact with other groups, and the Dutch, you know, lost some of their cultural identity too. It's the idea of that melding pot coming together in the city, and you don't have that little islands anymore. We're out in the country, but that's not the case. You could stay isolated from all that other stuff, as my family would say. They didn't want to go into the city. They wanted to stay away from it. Out in the country where it was quiet and they didn't have too many people. So we interacted only with other Pennsylvania Dutch. Where in the city, that wasn't the case. These people would have to interact with these other cultural groups. So if our videos came across over all this time that we totally discount the city Dutch, no, I apologize, I guess. They're out there, and I think it's important for us to look back and remember that what they did for the culture is extremely important. Late 1800s and early 1900s, the city Dutch were the ones that really, as far as writing down the dialect and getting it published and getting it saved and archived, it was the city Dutch and we could say the educated Dutch that did all that. So a lot of the things we have today, when we look at what Pennsylvania Dutch literature is out there, we can thank the city Dutch for doing that, because the farmers weren't doing it. They didn't have time to do stuff like that. And a lot of them couldn't read and write Pennsylvania Dutch. So they had 8th grade education in English, not in Pennsylvania Dutch. They could speak it, but they couldn't read it or write it. So it was the educated, the city Dutch that really left a great legacy for us as Pennsylvania Dutch people today. So we have to give kudos to them. We can't underplay that. That's important. So I think it's important for people not Pennsylvania Dutch to realize that, as Adam was his name, I think. Adam says there were city Dutch out there, and they're still
just
out
kind
there.
of an endangered species.
Yeah, they're the endangered species of the Pennsylvania Dutch.
Yeah,
Well, that's a good way of putting it.
We should start
maybe.
a program to
Save a city
Dutch.
Dutchman. Yeah, we could have stickers made up.
Oh yeah.
And that means you can't, if they're on, you can't touch them. Well,
you can feed them.
you can feed them, but you can't touch them. Yeah, and you have to protect where they live.
Yeah, you gotta show up with a red beet egg and.
Maybe. Save a city Dutchman. We are endangered. Oh, maybe we should call, who does the endangered species? The Wildlife Federation or whatever.
Well, pretty much
Department of the Interior.
Yeah,
maybe
Dutchmen
we should
are pretty
send them
wild.
an email.
We could do that. We'll start a program.
petition.
Yeah. So.
We'll let you know when the petition's ready for signatures.
Yeah. So
maybe you could adopt a city Pennsylvania Dutchman.
Adopt a Dutchman? You can send us presents?
No, not send them presents, but adopt them.
Oh, true. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Alright, well, you heard it from the Dutchman. My name is Chris LaRose. This here is Doug Mainford, our resident Dutchman. And until next time, mach scoot.
If you have a question, you have to email us at busterpa@yahoo.com.